they've got the edge pressure with Chandler Jones on one side. If you can get somebody on the interior to really give quarterbacks pressure to push that pocket back, there are some decent names on the free agent market.
Welcome in everyone to your 2020 free agent primers, and today it's all about the defensive side of the ball and how may the Cardinals attack it here in free agency that opens up on March 18th. Now guys, let's start with probably the highest priority on the line here. It's the D-line up front. And of course you have Corey Peters, the veteran, the constant, but they really need to find some depth there.
And I think Zach Allen is the guy who they still have high hopes for. He was an early third-round pick last year and got hurt. You do feel like he's going to contribute something next year. But yeah, you definitely need more depth after that. And if you can get a star on the defensive line, you really haven't had one since Calais Campbell was here. So they've got the edge pressure with Chandler Jones on one side. If you can get somebody on the interior to really give quarterbacks pressure to push that pocket back, it makes things hard on quarterbacks, and there are some decent names on the free agent market.
I am interested to see exactly what they end up doing in free agency on the defensive line in particular, partly because of some of those names you were saying and the wealth of people that you might be able to do compared to maybe some other positions the Cardinals would chase in free agency. But I also feel like there's so many numbers that they might need. I mean, you mentioned Corey Peters, and obviously Zach Allen is somebody they want, but right now there's a lot of question marks, and you probably need 4 or 5 or 6 guys to make sure you have the kind of depth you want. So you're not going to be able to get all those guys in free agency, and you're certainly not going to be able to get a bunch of high-profile guys all at one position. So it'll be a very interesting way how this all plays out.
I think everybody would love Chris Jones, the Kansas City Chiefs star defensive tackle. There is talk that he is going to be franchised, or they're going to try to keep him. Like Darren's saying, we don't know exactly quite yet who's going to be out there because of franchise tags and tenders and that sort of thing. But there's some older guys, Dominic Sue. I mean, some of the guys that are maybe 30, 31 who used to be stars. Do you want to get somebody like that who's cheaper now, or do you want to try to get for that big splash? And at defensive tackle, I mean, you don't have a ton of salary cap space, but it's such a need, like you said, that maybe you do go for a splash on the defensive line.
On the Cardinals side, the scheduled free agents are Rodney Gunter, Jonathan Bullard, Zach Kerr, who we also saw make some big plays this year, and Clinton McDonald and Karen Reed. So out of those guys, what's the possibility of retaining some of them?
You know, I think all of those guys might be in a situation where it's kind of a wait and see. I mean, Rodney Gunter, we thought last year was definitely going to be leaving. I think he thought he was going to be leaving. I think the Cardinals had already planned on him leaving. And then the market never really opened up for him the way he wanted, and he ultimately came back here for a lesser deal than he was expecting, and the Cardinals were okay with that because at that point they could use some depth. So we'll have to see what happens to Gunter. You know, guys like Bullard and Kerr, they kind of filled in where they needed to. They each had their moments. But again, I think you're trying to find something more solid that you can go with starters, and those guys might be on the backside. And the other thing for all this is, as it's playing out, is where the collective bargaining agreement might be. We're right on the verge at this point as we're taping of whether it's going to be voted in, and whether it's in place or not in place is going to change the rules on how all this goes.
I think we have to remember the Cardinals were scrambling a bit on the defensive line last season. In training camp, Robert Kimdichie and Darius Philon were both released, and then there were a significant number of injuries at the position. So you mentioned the guys that are free agents, they were really brought in as emergency Band-Aids.
Plug and play.
Yeah, so you look at maybe some of those guys are depth, but I think in an ideal world, you can go out and grab a guy that you feel like is going to be a starter next to Corey Peters and Zach Allen.
Now let's stay in the front seven, just down to the linebackers. Another high priority, I would say, filling those holes. You look on the outside in, of course, Chandler Jones holding it down, but he needs to find a partner in crime this season. So the Cardinals need to fulfill that spot. Obviously a high priority.
That's something that was simply missing. Marcus Golden left as a free agent last year, and they tried to figure out some things, and it didn't quite work out, I think, the way the Cardinals had been hoping. Now, what do you do in terms of, do you wait for the draft and try and find a younger guy, which is not always easy. I mean, there might be a couple pass rushers in the draft coming up, but those are premium positions, and the really good ones, you're not really sure how it's going to play out. To me, outside pass rusher would definitely be someplace you'd want to look in free agency. I mean, I guess in a perfect world, I think we'd all love to see Marcus Golden come back here. He loves playing with Chandler Jones. He had a pretty solid season with 10 sacks, but again, what kind of market is going to develop for him. I think with Marcus Golden, you're talking about a guy who is the guy we've always known, which is a really hard worker. I don't know if his ceiling is still that high at this point, but he's proven he can come back from the ACL and he'd be a nice booking because he's already been a nice booking for Chandler Jones.
And there's some big-time names on the market: Jadeveon Clowney, Shaquille Barrett, who was the NFL sack leader this season. When you get to those guys, that's rarefied air, and they make a lot of money on the open market. So if you want one of those guys, and every fan would love to have Jadeveon Clowney, but that's going to take a huge chunk of your cap space.
And the Cardinals have money to spend, but when you talk about these high-profile players, it adds up quickly.
Well, and I would say along those lines when we're talking about it, and Steve Keim made it very clear in multiple interviews, including when we saw him in Indianapolis at the Combine, that they've done analytics, and the guys that are making a lot of money in free agency, $5 million or more, the success rate is less than 50%. And now we don't know exactly how they're measuring the success with this statistic that Steve Keim is talking about, but again, it felt like a cautionary tale, like, hey, maybe we don't go with the splashy people, and Kyle just mentioned a couple of pretty splashy names. So I think we're going to have to see how that goes. Steve Keim had told me a couple weeks ago that the most success that they've had in free agency tends to be in the wave 2 and the wave 3, not necessarily wave 1. And I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of reason for them to feel like they need to change. I think they want to make sure that this money gets spent wisely.
Now, of course, on the inside, Jordan Hicks, the Mike backer, things get a little fuzzy there because obviously they made the move last season, Hassan Reddick, to the outside. So he also needs a partner in crime inside, and you're looking at Joe Walker, who was a mainstay obviously inside for the Cardinals, but he will be a free agent this coming season.
Yeah, and Joe Walker was kind of even on the bubble in training camp, it felt like, of making the team. So the fact that he got elevated showed you that the Cardinals did not have a lot of depth there, especially when Hassan Reddick didn't work out. To me, that's a clear need as an inside linebacker next to Jordan Hicks. Again, maybe you won't break the bank. I feel like you have salary cap space to get 1 or 2 headlining free agents, and it's up to Steve Keim and those guys to figure out what position makes the most sense. But at inside linebacker, if you can just get an upgrade, even if it's an average starter, I feel like that's going to be a big thing for the defense, because we saw the issues against tight ends. We saw the inside linebackers have some problems. Jordan Hicks was very good. You need to find that guy next to him.
Darren, D-line, linebackers, seemingly the highest priorities. Is there another position that you feel is in need that they could fulfill here in free agency?
I feel like the one thing that kind of has always kind of stuck in my head a little bit, and I certainly don't think this is be splashy or anything huge, but I do see the way their back end sets up that maybe a veteran safety makes a lot of sense. I think they like the Thompson twins, Jalen and Deontay, and kind of where they are, but I think those guys are still growing. You have Budda Baker. I think having a veteran guy back there makes a lot of sense. Now, whether it's going to be somebody that's recognizable or somebody that's high profile, or even somebody that's going to be brought in as anything more than depth. I mean, it might just be, hey, we like Jalen Thompson back there and we like Budda Baker and we just want to bring somebody in just in case of an injury. So it might not be super sexy, but I think that's a position that might be possible.
And in the past, he's always brought in like a veteran guy. Tony Jefferson, a guy like that in the market, could come back. We don't know. We will see. A lot of things have to play out before March 18th when free agency opens. Until then, stay right here.